Hi guys, welcome to another BigLipz podcast. My name is Kath Maurice, and with me is Sam Macaulay Blair. So,
Hello.
as always, we are two kind of former current film students who basically just thought there's not enough info or people talking about films out there, so we would just add to it. So that's what we've done. This week is episode 10, and this week we are going to be looking or talking about Japanese horrors and their kind of American remakes. Um, so basically, we've got four movies that we've watched: the original Japanese and then the remake. So we're gonna just kind of talk about each of them in turn. Um, so the first one we're going to talk about is probably one of the more famous ones, which is the Grudge. Obviously, for those who don't know, it's basically a grudge is like a kind of manifestation of like rage, and essentially the Japanese movie starts with a woman who has been like horribly murdered in her house, so her kind of spirit, if you will, kind of like manifests in the house, and then it attacks people and things start to get crazy. um, so for this one, we both watched the Japanese version, and then I watched the 2020 remake, and Sam watched the 2004ish Sarah Michelle Gellar one. Anyway,
I think it was. I think it may have been a bit earlier than that, but yeah,
yeah.
early two
So,
thousands.
yeah, Sam, or you want to start with maybe your thoughts on the Japanese one?
Yeah, I mean, like my thoughts on both are kind of linked, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is, I'm pretty sure it's actually the same director who does the Japanese one and the American one.
Oh yeah.
Which is quite wild, or at least this American one. Yeah, yeah. Which I didn't really. I remember I watched it with some friends, basically the American version, and I remember like one of my friends noting that like a Japanese name came up as like the director's name, and it wasn't until I was like doing some reading on the movies afterwards that I think I was reading a review for the American version, and the review mentioned it being the same director that did both, which I thought was
Wow.
like quite interesting. Because obviously like with this like topic, one of the things I like obviously like kept thinking about was why were these films made?
Mm-hmm.
Like genuinely like because obviously the films already exist and like but I was like what was the actual like was the idea okay well people aren't going to watch the movies with subtitles so we need to remake them was the idea oh like this is a really cool idea for a movie we want to just like make that movie basically or steal
Mm-hmm.
that idea so we're going to do it like I was curious in like what the actual like impetus behind these like remakes was and I couldn't find any clear answer but I found a lot of like speculation that it was kind of interesting that talks about the fact that so American when you think about the fact that like in America like pretty much every movie they watch is like from their country
Mm-hmm.
like that nothing is really like imported in the movie industry whereas like here in like Scotland and the UK the majority of films that we watch would probably be American so like even though the cultures are pretty like intrinsically linked and there's like there's no language barrier or anything we are still watching like a different
Mm-hmm.
culture a different like different acts like a completely sort of different society in many ways and I guess in theory that makes it easier for like most every other country to then watch international films because it's not as like weird a thing whereas like in America um they very much are like well we're only used to watching our movies so
Yeah.
the idea of watching something from like a completely different place is a bit weird to them um so that being said like basically yeah like that being said I think like the reason effectively is yeah they didn't feel like these movies would have made any money these movies would have attracted any kind of audience where they released in their original form so the idea was okay well these are great movies so let's translate them over to America however like the Grudge with it being the same
Mm-hmm.
director I'm pretty sure that like the American version of the Grudge, the one with Sarah Michelle Gellar, I think it pretty much like takes place in the same like continuity and the same canon as like Ju-on, as like
Mm-hmm.
the Japanese one, which I thought was like quite cool. Like there's not even though it like kind of goes through the same beats, kind of like I guess like the Fargo TV series and like the Fargo movie, where like it's established that these events take place in the same universe, even though they are like effectively like there's like so many like similar beats and echoes. So I really appreciated the fact that like it's not redundant watching one and then watching the other. Even if like there are moments that are basically mimicked and stuff, you are still watching something that like fleshes out another aspect of like that world, of that like universe, of that mythology. And obviously like, despite the American remake being like like having an American cast, it is still set in Japan, which I
Yeah, I
thought
thought
added
that
like a
about
really
that
interesting
one.
flavor. Yeah,
I think that's
and
interesting
I
because oh sorry, like on the films that we're discussing
oh,
later on, it
okay.
tends to just be very much like this is a Japanese movie in Japan, this is an American movie in America. Because even like the
Yeah.
2020 remake is set in America.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I appreciated the fact that, and the Grudge, the American one, I had seen when I was like 14 years old. I think that was like my first ever like, oh, I'm into horrors kind of phase. And but like because of that, it was quite weird watching. I watched John before rewatching the American Grudge. It was quite weird because I was like I had like memories of like moments that happened in the movie, as you would sort of expect from a horror movie like The Grudge, that are seared into your brain. So I kind of knew like elements of it, and there were elements of it that I kind of forgotten that was like coming back to me as I watched it. Um, but yeah, I think like um, overall, I don't think I was like super impressed with the Japanese original. And again, like going against the movie is the fact that obviously I've seen the American remake, so I'm kind of familiar with like the monster, as it were, and like the kind of mythology. Um, but one of the things that I didn't like about it, and again, this also comes down to the fact that I will admit I watched this movie on YouTube because there was a copy of it on YouTube, and it was in 360p, so it wasn't
Oh,
exactly like
nice.
the highest quality experience. But even then, I feel like you can still, what like resolution is resolution. I feel like you can still you still get a lot from like the way something's made and like the other elements that kind of like go into the film. And I found that like the look of the film to me seemed quite like cheap, quite kind of almost like student filmy
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. I think one thing I really noticed was like the the lighting was like really like off, like it was really sort of stark. I remember there was one sequence which is like replicated in the Sarah Michelle Gellar American remake where they're in like it's like a sort of big apartment building, and there's like a scare with the Grudge, and then the woman like is down in the lobby, and I think there's like a guard, and she kind of like says there's something up there, and he then it's like so the scene where she's like being terrorized by the Grudge, it's like all white, it could not be like brighter, and then when she's like telling him that there's something up there, he grabs a torch. I was like, mate, you're
That's
gonna be
amazing.
fine. There's so much light up there, and they
That's
do like they
hilarious.
do like slightly darken it when he goes up with his torch just to almost like justify it. But even then, like you can still see absolutely fine without that torch. So it's things like that I kind of thought like kind of like pulled me from the experience a bit, like kind of detracted. Like I didn't feel like it felt super competently made in that like sense. And I felt as well like where's it going with this? Yeah, the lighting was sort of off, and it just like there was something about even like the effects. Like there's a few like sort of big effects shots where it's like the Grudge is like being all supernatural and stuff, and like maybe like hanging over someone or like pouring out of something. And again, I just kind of thought like that really just looks like a very like cheap effect shot. And again, this was back in a time when like effects were much
Yeah.
harder to do, and were like a much newer thing. But I still thought it really really stood out. And again, they just like pull you from the experience where you're like, I am watching a movie, and it just didn't feel like, yeah, just I was disappointed. I think in a lot of ways because I was like this. I wanted a bit more from it. I wanted it to. I genuinely was like, okay, this could creep me out. Like I'm prepared to be scared by this. Um, and I just felt like it was a bit shoddy. Um, but that be I guess like on the flip side of that, I thought like in terms of like conceptually, like I don't think it really like worked as well as it should have done, but I really like the fact that it's like all different segments and different characters, and there's like sort of like, again, there is like a sort of thread running through and connecting. But I like the fact that it just cuts between like these different stories, so that there's it, in theory, like really builds the tension, because you're like, well, anything could happen to any of these characters at any moment, because that was just introduced to them, and I've seen like multiple characters die at this point. But again, like, I didn't really find, there was no point where I was like genuinely on the edge of my seat, like, oh my god, what's going to happen to this character? And I don't know if that was partly because you don't get as much time to get invested, but I just felt like I wasn't really attached to anyone. I didn't really care that much, and I was like, that's a really cool idea, but it didn't really land. Even in the same with like in the conclusion, when they're like in the house, and I think she looks in the mirror, and then there's that sort of motif that's been running through where like characters have been like covering their eyes or putting their hands like on their face, and then the movie like shows you that was a deliberate thing that was setting something up, and I was like, oh cool, like, I'm like really now like interested in what the payoff of this is going to be. And then it's like she puts her hands up, and then she just like like the grudge kind of comes out of her hands.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's
because she
that's
gets
a bit of a
kind
weird
of like
payoff.
scot-free, doesn't she, really, in comparison to the other
Yeah.
people in the movie? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like, oh no, that was another thing where I was like, that was like a really cool idea that was set up, and I like the fact that the movie like really quietly sort of seeded this thing, and then like showed you like, oh, like here's the payoff to it. But I just didn't think it was like I didn't think that the payoff really made any sense. I didn't think it was very good. So yeah, those are basically my thoughts all in on like the Japanese version on Ju-on. What were yours, since we both watched that one?
I think obviously I had the same kind of thought that you did about the kind of student film look of it, and I think it is because yeah, you're right, the lighting just looked so weird. Like, it was lit kind of like this room is just now, and maybe it's just because we're used to horror movies that are really dark, and we're used to kind of like in our head maybe like dark equals scary, so that you think even when like like when I was young and I didn't like horror movies, if you were watching one, you'd be watching it and you'd be like, oh, it's daylight, there's not going to be a scare here. So I don't know if that's maybe, I mean, it wasn't, I think this suffered from, there's so much hype around it, and like everyone, especially when I was young, was like, oh yeah, the Japanese one's so scary, and then you watch and you're like, it was creepy, there was definitely some creepy bits, but most of them, because of its age as well, like you'd already seen the scariest bits, like the bit when she kind of pulls the covers up and the grudge is there, and so it was a bit kind of like, I think it would have been better to see at the time, as opposed to now, especially because like horror's making like a comeback, if you will, just now. So especially now we're used to like a lot better horrors.
Yeah.
But having said that, I do think there was parts that were really creepy. I think the bit where she was kind of crawling down the stairs was really creepy, and I think it worked because she was going at that creepy, horrible, slow pace.
Yeah.
And I thought that was funny as well, because it kind of reminded me of The Exorcist. Obviously, just because it's like a girl who's possessed crawling down the stairs. So, but I wondered if that was like intentional, or whether that was like a wee kind of homage to Western horror. But I don't know, probably not.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, not my favourite movie of all time, but I think it was alright. It was worth a watch.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm very glad that I have seen it now. But yeah, I would say, I think this is potentially, I think this is the only one that I would flat out say like the American version is actually better. At least again the one I watched. Which like if you don't mind me going on to my thoughts of the American one. I like actually like was, because I went in again like I said, having seen it when I was 14, so I was like, am I going to really get scared by it? Am I really going to be that interested in it? Like, is it just going to be one of those things where I watch it and I'm like, especially after watching Ju-on and kind of being disappointed, am I going to watch it and just kind of think, oh, well, that's also kind of naff? And to an extent, like, yeah, there was like an element of that where I was like, it definitely isn't as scary as it was the first time I saw it. But I mean, like, what horror movie is? But at the same time, like, I felt like the American movie succeeds in doing what a lot of like the Japanese one tried. It has like, again, those like, they're different characters, but there's like reoccurring characters now, and there's actually like plots like sort of woven through. Again, it sort of reprises like some of the scares, in particular like the scene with the sheets as you were talking about, and like the lift before that, which is really well done. But at the same time, like yeah, like I think one thing I noticed was it was filmed much better. The lighting was way better.
Yeah.
So I genuinely think that, and there was again like some really like creepy moments. The whole thing with like there's a whole thing with a character. Well, they find like they go into like the attic and they find like a bloody jaw,
Ooh.
and then there's like a payoff to that later on. Which I'd like totally forgotten about, but as soon as it like that scene was happening, I was like, oh my god, I remember this when I was younger, and I remember being freaked out by it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think the American remake in this one is like in my eyes is like unequivocally better. I thought it was like a much sort of smoother, much smarter ride. I thought Sarah Michelle Gellar was really good, put in a really good performance. I think everyone put in like a really good performance. And again, I liked the fact that it was like connected to the original. I like the fact that it isn't just like, okay, well, like let's wipe things and start from scratch. It's the fact that it's like set in Japan, so it's like, okay, even though it's American, I like the fact that it's almost like the gravity of this thing has like pulled these people in. And that there's something about that kind of added to like the creepiness, I think. But yeah, like I really dug the American version basically. I thought it like held up surprisingly well. And I think one thing to mention, I guess, comes from the Japanese version. But again, I think it was like executed better. And the American one is even just like the design of the Grudge and or the like yeah the design and like the sort of the way that it utilizes sound. I thought that was one thing that like the original obviously does quite well, and the remake does well too. Like for instance, the whole thing of like the cats being like a reoccurring like creature, and the like kids making like and the Grudge making like cat noises. It's just like so wonderfully like unsettling and just like really simple but like really effectively chilling. So yeah, like all in all, I think the American one is superior, but like it's the ideas were there, and I like the fact that the director basically like redid it and like fulfilled the sort of potential in a lot of ways. So what about you? What was was it the 2020 version?
Yeah. I think remake's not a very fair word for it, because it was a bit more like it wasn't a sequel either. It was like a weird, do you know, in that kind of grey area where it's not a sequel, but it's not a proper remake, where they've basically just decided, oh, we want all the clout of the name in our terrible movie. It's pretty much what I got from it.
Oh dear.
It was very like, it was weird. It was very much trying to be movies like Insidious and The Conjuring, but it just wasn't as good. I'm not a massive fan of those movies anyway. Insidious was quite creepy, but this was weird as well, because, well, basically it started in Japan, and there was a nanny, and she'd been in the house where the rest of the movies have taken place, and then the story is that she brought the curse home to America, and then it's like attached itself to this other house, and then people just start to get like infected. Is that the right word? No, probably not. Like terrorized by this grudge. But the one thing I would say about this movie was that it was really, really gory, like excessively gory.
Oh, really?
Which was weird when I had just watched the Japanese one, and it wasn't gory at all. I think there was like a few scenes where there was very fake, very red looking blood. But this was like, there was moments where I was watching it and I was like, oh god, I'm starting to feel a bit ill. And I think it definitely like relied on that. I think it was weird. It didn't need to have anything to do with the Grudge. It could just have been a haunted house or a haunted person kind of story. There was nothing. Basically, the Grudge part of it didn't add anything to the movie. It was a bit more preoccupied with being gory and making you jump, really, I thought, in my opinion anyway. I mean, some of the jump scares were scary, like they got me, but it just wasn't, like, it didn't have the same kind of creepy feel as The Grudge. And there was none of except from the very beginning, like a 2-minute scene, there was nothing like from the kind of original or anything from like kind of Japanese culture wise or anything like that. And it was just a really
Yeah.
weird film. It was definitely like they were like, people will watch this because it says The Grudge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
unfortunate.
so all in all,
I
I'm
do
kind
feel
of
for you
sad.
having.
Oh, sorry.
I, I was just gonna say I feel for you because it seems like you've watched the worst two Grudge movies.
I know. I feel jealous that you got the. I mean, you got to. I asked you to watch the Sarah Michelle Gellar one. Yeah,
To be fair, if you'd let me pick, then I would have picked the Sarah Michelle Gellar
true.
one.
Damn it! I should just have gone with that one as well. But oh well, I've seen it now.
True.
So I think moving on from that, this was our next movie is one that I hadn't really heard of, if I'm honest. It's a movie called Pulse. Um, so basically, the idea of this one is that they're basically like it's kind of got the same kind of idea as maybe a movie like The Ring, where it's kind of technology based. So someone finds something on their computer and it's like they get invited into this room and then it's videos of people dying and then consequently that person then dies and then it just spreads like that. Um, so yeah, Sam, I'm interested to hear your thoughts because I've got some thoughts.
I'm actually very interested to hear yours. Yeah, no, I was also enjoyed just like your summation of it there because yeah, like that was one thing where I was like, how would you go into delve into the plot? How would you explain the plot of this one? I actually like out of the Japanese movies, I think I like this one most. Um, I actually legitimately like so was it Pulse or I think it's called Kairo or something
Mm.
like that. Like the Japanese version. I actually really like this film. Um, like which really surprised me. Especially because like in the beginning I was like wasn't really feeling it and I was like okay like this I like yeah I'm not really like super into this. I'm not super buying it. There's some weird stuff at the start as well. Like I kind of
Mm-hmm.
wrote some notes and one thing I remember noticing about the start was like there's a couple of like really weird cuts. Like editing wise, there's like a
Mm-hmm.
few moments that are just like quite bizarre. Where it like cuts into. It does that. I can't remember like the. I'm sure there's like a rule for it or like a term for like, the rule, but it does that thing. You know, when you cut basically like in a movie, you're supposed to. If you're cutting on like the same person, you're kind of supposed to like change the angle significantly. I think there is like an
Mm-hmm.
actual like degree range that you're supposed to change it by. Otherwise, it just kind of looks really weird. It looks a bit off because you've basically cut into a shot that's too similar.
Yeah.
And there's like I think there's like two instances of that happening at the start of the movie. And both times I was like, why did they do that? But like the more I kind of got into the movie, and there were like some issues I had with it. Um, the more I kind of got into the movie, the more I was like, actually, like I really kind of like this. I really liked, especially coming from because I watched it after John, so I watched it just after
Mm-hmm.
John. Um, I really thought that the lighting in it, funnily enough, was really good. There was some really like really nice shots. There's a shot in particular when there's a sort of reoccurring shot. I think it's in like twice where like a character's walking across a bridge and you just see like the street lights kind of like curving down or like the coast lights sort of curving down, and that was like quite pretty. There's one I think in particular where like character comes out of like an empty sort of train and they're calling like another character's name and there's like sort of fog and it's just dark and there's the train and it's lit and it's just in the middle of like sort of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And I think they like sort of stand up atop a ridge. Yeah, and that looked amazing. Um, yeah, like the filming of it, I actually like really rated the filming of it in particular. Like and like out of all of them, I thought like this movie was like really carefully considered and like composed in a lot of ways. A lot of the shots were like really well sort of composed, but more than that, like I was looking at I just like briefly, I found like this sort of analysis, sort of just like watching like someone watching the movie on YouTube, which I only found like literally like about an hour ago. So I only watched like the first 10 minutes of it. But that was interesting to get like another perspective and to get some more insight onto like yeah, what someone else was kind of like taking away from it. And one thing they were talking about, which because they're showing like the movie at the same time as like they're like on the screen and they're talking about it, you can like you can really see where they're coming from. They talk about the fact that the movie makes a very very like big effort to have the camera as distant as possible. Like they're kind of avoids doing like medium close ups. It kind of has like the camera like there's like shots of it like looking through windows or like standing the furthest like point of the room and looking at people. Even like in terms of like the blocking, they'll have characters sitting like quite far apart and like kind of sitting away from each other, and that all ties into the movie's kind of theme, which is loneliness, and isolation. And I really appreciated the sort of philosophical aspect of this movie. That was I think that was when I started going like, oh, I actually quite like this. Was when there's like one scene in particular where they're talking about like computer program and dots, and the fact that like the dots are like they can't like connect with another one, or like they just kind of like disintegrate. And obviously that the whole thing is basically just like explaining how it works with the ghosts, and the fact that from what because again I had to read up on this movie after watching it, because there was a lot of it I was like, I don't really get why they've done this, but it seems to be that the whole sort of message of the movie is about like the idea of that like ghosts are sort of spilling over into our world and they're trying to connect with people, and it's all about how like, you know, obviously this movie came out when like computers were quite new, the internet's quite new. That was one of the things as well at the start that was kind of putting me off it, was the fact that the movie's like a bit like it doesn't have like there's some stuff that like it does with the internet where you're like, that's not really like how it would have worked in 2001, but there's also, and it's also a bit like clunky sometimes with like explaining how things work and people kind of not getting things. But yeah, the idea seems to be that okay, like the internet suddenly opened up this possibility of like people being able to connect online, and people actually being able to like find each other. And but like despite that, the sort of message is that okay, yeah, people can connect, but it's not proper connection, and in fact these people are still like intensely lonely, which I think is very true, especially like in sort of contemporary society. I mean, we've all kind of seen that with the pandemic, and the fact that, you know, we've all had to kind of connect via via Zoom and via webcams, and yeah, and even though it's like a means of communication and connection, it doesn't actually fulfill that need, not properly. So yeah, I really dug the fact that like the movie had some things to say and had some interesting stuff to explore, which I feel like horror so often doesn't. And I think the movie was probably like quite light on scares, but there is still like quite a pervasive creepy atmosphere. I thought the soundtrack, the score at points was really good. Like there was points where I definitely noticed I was like, I'm like kind of digging this score. It's definitely like enhancing the experience. I thought there was some like really compelling imagery, obviously as I've mentioned before, but even with like the forbidden room and the idea of like the red tape, I thought that's just like such a good, like one of those things that just works really well as like a visual element. On the not so like good side, there are some also like naff special effects. In particular, there's like one scene where a character like disintegrates into the wall, and there's like all these like dark flecks floating around, and again it just looks like almost like an early 2000s like screensaver. And then towards the end there's a really bad one where it's like a plane crashing, and it looks like the most like artificial like looking plane crash that you can imagine in a movie. Like it looks so alarmingly fake. But aside from that, again, I think the movie's like lighting and sort of composition, and I think it has like quite a lot of really long takes as well, that it uses like quite well. I think all those things like kind of stood out way more, and I do think that like it wasn't those were like two moments in particular that I was like, okay, that's a bit naff. But I think overall, I was like the movie tried a lot visually, and I think generally succeeded. I thought the ghosts a lot of the time looked quite creepy, or at least looked as like convincing as the movie was trying to make them. But yeah, well, like still retaining their like thematic connection to like the internet and all that. But yeah, that's enough of my ramblings. But yeah, basically had a lot of love for Pulse.
Funny you should say that, because I didn't have a huge amount of love for this movie. I'm not gonna lie. For me, it felt like a trek. I think I watched it in like 2 parts because I'm sure I fell asleep in the middle of it. Like I was just not feeling it. Although your analysis was really interesting. Like I think your analysis was probably more interesting than the film. I don't know. I don't know whether it was maybe. I felt like it was super, super slow. And it almost felt at times like it didn't. Like the movie almost didn't really understand what the plot was. I think,
Mm.
or quite the opposite, where at times where it so clearly understood what was going on that it almost didn't feel the need to tell you what was happening. Like there was
Yeah.
points in the movie. I don't know whether I was maybe just not paying attention or because it was in Japanese. But there was points where, like one bit in particular, when it's the kind of main character, the guy, and the woman that he meets at his college or whatever, or no, it's the woman in the car. Sorry, um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're kind of driving about, and there's no one in sight. And I remember thinking, like, where is everyone? They haven't even explained it. Like, it wasn't until I watched the remake
Yeah.
that I was like, right, okay, that's what's happened. But yeah,
I actually had like a very similar experience in that regards where like yeah as I was watching it I was like I'm probably going to need to rewatch this at some point because like I
mm-hmm.
feel like I've either missed a lot or like the movie just hasn't clued me in as much as it feels like it's clued me
Yeah.
in.
I think this movie is similar to like a couple of the other ones or another one we're going to discuss, and the Grudge, and that there always seems to be a lot of emphasis on like a friendship group or like a group of
Yeah,
young
that's a
people.
good point.
So that was the same in that sense. That was well done in parts, but I don't know. It's hard to say because there's points where like people are disappearing, and then um like a couple that like the two girls that people are disappearing all over the shop, and then their friend, they can't get a hold of them, and they're just like, I'll just keep trying them on the phone. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, surely you would, go to their house and be like, are you still
Yeah,
alive?
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't know.
definitely.
I don't know. It just wasn't for me, I'm afraid.
I think that's fair. I think this is also the first time we've like majorly disagreed on a film,
Yeah.
on this podcast, which is very interesting. And yeah, like I think all your points are very valid. Again, like when I was doing, I think this is probably more than any other films. This is the one that I kind of read up on the most,
Mm-hmm.
just because like I kind of wanted to get like the plot a bit more like ironed out because obviously like again like I did have trouble following it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was just kind of curious to see like because again it felt like really sort of cleverly like it felt like it was sort of well composed and it felt like it was like thought out and again it felt like there was like a message and the movie was trying to articulate something so I was like I want to kind of understand what
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah and like sort of reading into like discussions and I guess like dissections of the movie there are definitely like it seems like the basically like all the responses to the movie just like range as far as you can imagine where
Yeah.
like any sort of opinion you think you could have on this film someone seems to have but like there doesn't really seem to be as much like of a unanimous opinion as you would get with like maybe other things like it doesn't seem to be like I think the movie like initially premiered at like a festival and got a lot of buzz and then I think when it came out, I think it might have actually had like kind of mixed reviews. I think some people were actually like, "I absolutely love this thing." Other
Mm-hmm.
people were like, "I'm not so sure." But there's also like loads of people in between. There's people who are like, "I liked this one part of it, but didn't like the rest." So yeah, I think like all the things that you're saying, all the ways that you felt, seem pretty valid, and they are absolutely shared by like other people. Where there's like definitely I've seen like a lot of people being like, "Yeah, I just didn't really get this. It just didn't really work for me at all."
Yeah. I think though, saying that it did pick up towards the end. Like there was the bit when he went back to get fuel, and then there was a whole kind of sequence after that. That
Yeah.
was good. But that was probably it for me.
One thing I'd say actually was I liked the like I guess you kind of mentioned it already, but there was a sense of scope to this movie that I really appreciated,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think you really get that from horrors very often, where like it actually felt like horrors are usually like typically really contained and it's like all about. I mean the movie's theme is isolation. But horror movies obviously usually are about isolation and about like this is one specific thing that's like unfortunately targeting like our protagonists or
Mm-hmm.
like it could be you sort of thing. Whereas this was actually, as you say, like a sort of like I think it's like it first seems like sort of citywide, but then I think in the movie they actually tell you it's global.
Mm-hmm.
The event that's going on, and I think like by the end of the film, it does kind of make a point of like really highlighting that, and by the end of the film, like it feels like the movie's in a very like feels like everything in the movie's in a very different place than when you started. And I appreciated the fact that there was actually like a sense of scale to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, like I think again most horror movies don't ever like don't ever attempt that or don't ever think to try that.
Yeah.
And again that like you could argue like in some ways I think the movie does a good I think for me the movie did a good job of selling that as something that's creepy, but I guess that could be like a difficult thing to pull off where it could easily like break the illusion and you can go, well, now that it's a big global event, I'm not really that scared because like I would know if this was going on just now.
Yeah.
Um
That's a good point.
but yeah, that's probably the last thing I have to add in favour of my beloved Kairo.
Since you love that one so much, I'm so interested to know what your thoughts on the remake was because yeah, it was
Even better.
even better.
Surpassed the original in every single way. No, the remake was unfortunately pretty trash. And I like the sad thing is as well, like going into it as well, because this was before I'd kind of done my like deep dive analysis of Kairo. So going into it, I was like, okay, well, I feel like I could do with watching a remake of this movie just to see like to make kind of sense of it and to see what's like. I was genuinely curious to see what was like translated in the remake, and then I think there's like opening credits for the remake, and one of the things that really caught my eye, I don't know if you noticed this, was did you see who one of the writers of the movie was? There's two writers, but did you see one of them?
I don't think so. No.
It's Wes Craven.
I did see that actually.
Of the Pulse remake.
Do you know what's even funnier? I read up on it afterwards, and he's like completely disowned the movie.
Really?
Yeah, he was like, "That's not the movie that I wrote."
Oh, yeah. Really? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't do any like further like plugging into the whole like Wes Craven thing. But yeah, I saw that he was credited as like a co-writer, and that really gave me hope, because I was like, okay, like Wes Craven, especially like because I think the remake came out in like 2006, so I was like, this is after, well after he's done like, was it Nightmare on Elm Street, and he's done like Scream, so having especially like considering that he's done Scream by that point, the movie felt so sort of cliched and so sort of like by the numbers. I will say in its defense, I don't think it was the worst of the American remakes, but it really really wasn't great. It even had like even the cast was like decent, like Kristen Bell. I have a lot of love for. Like I think there was a couple other actors that like I recognize but don't know the name of.
Ian Somerhalder. I'm not a massive fan of him. All he does is like smolder.
Yeah. Is he the one who looks like... Is he in Vampire Diaries, or does he just look like he should be in Vampire Diaries? He is in Vampire Diaries, okay. Okay. I recognised him as well, obviously. But yeah, I thought the movie... Seemed like the movie had enough going for it that I was like, okay, this could be something. But really kind of wasn't. As a plus, there was one sequence... Like, there was like a couple of moments where the effects were like decent. There was like one scene where they like go into like a sort of computer mainframe room, and there's this effect where like they're sort of shimmering, like the actual like I don't know what the hell you call them, columns of computer stuff. They're sort of shimmering, and that was in like a sort of pulsing way, and I was like, that's a nice sort of like that's a cool visual, and I guess like thematically appropriate. But other than that, like the movie replicates the scene where like someone disintegrates and it looks just as bad, and then also the plane crash. I actually genuinely, I was like, have they just used the same effect from the first movie? Because it looks identically as bad, like except this one came out like 5 years later. Yeah, that they've just like found and they're just holding on to.
Like they're like, we paid for the royalties for that. We paid to be able to use this, so we're using it.
Yeah, we were milking it. It's going in both versions. That was the stipulation when they did the remake. They were like, fine, but we're not redoing the CGI for either of those two scenes.
Love it.
But I thought it was pretty trash. Even like down to like the ending, where like in the Japanese version they obviously like flee to the boat and then they're on the sea, which I think connects back to like the start, because there's not a shot at the start where they're on a boat, and then in the remake it's just they just kind of like are driving away, and there was like an encounter earlier on in the movie where they like meet this like older, like almost like just it really reminded me of like Shaun of the Dead when you just have like a group of like survivors in the apocalypse. And I just found that really funny. Like it really like again like destroyed, like there wasn't any tension in the movie, but it kind of destroyed what like pretense of tension there was. And I just found the idea of like whatever their story was, I was like, I'd rather be following that because it almost looks like so absurdly brilliant. But yeah, the woman just like frantically explains about dead zones and needing to find dead. Which I was like, if you know about dead zones, why are you not in one? Like, why would you leave a dead zone?
I love that as well, because all she needed to shout was get to a dead zone. These are two young people. They know, they probably can figure out what a dead zone is. But she's like frantically explaining it like for 20 minutes. No wonder her husband was getting raging.
Yeah, I know exactly. I'd be pissed off too. But yeah, obviously the movie ends where they're like in the car and they're attacked by that weird like armed shimmer bald man.
And it takes her about 40 minutes to realise, oh, it's my phone that's attracting them.
Yeah, exactly. I think is there a voiceover before that even spells that out?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. Like it was very obvious watching it. Like, girl, chuck your phone away.
Yeah.
Who's gonna phone you anyway? Apart from us, all our pals are dead.
Exactly. The movie's gone to great lengths to show you that you are now very alone. So like, you don't need that thing. But yeah, so Pulse did not live up to Kairo, unfortunately.
Do you know what bit I think was just hysterical and needs to be mentioned? The bit at the very beginning when... No, never mind, I'm talking about the wrong movie.
That is so good that like it's such a forgettable film that you've all talking about it, already forgotten about it.
Yeah, it felt like the kind of film that you would watch when you were like 13, like at a sleepover.
Absolutely, that's 100%.
And I don't ever remember watching any good films when I was 13 at sleepovers, so...
No, definitely not. I think, like you're absolutely right. Like it is, I almost wish that I saw it as like that at that age, because then it would have like, the movie would have had something going for it. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'm just like, really, when you were making this, did you really like finish it and go, yep, job well done. We really nailed that one.
This was the one with Octavia Spencer was in it briefly, wasn't she? She was like a landlady or something.
Honest? Oh yeah, she was. Yeah, she was.
She was like a weird caricature of like a sassy black woman.
Yeah.
That felt weird. That. Yeah. And then there was the whole bit with the cat. That was never really explained. Mind she found it like in the bin.
Cat. I'll be honest, I can't even remember that.
It was just before she went through and her boyfriend had hung himself, and she like heard this noise and opened the cupboard door, and there was like a cat, but it was like almost mummified kind of thing, and it was like yowling in the bin, and then she just closed the door, and then Octavia Spencer mentioned it in passing, like, oh, blah blah blah, the cat, and it was never addressed.
That is right. That's so weird. Yeah, that's really, really bizarre. My God. What a film.
Yeah. So leaving it at that and moving on.
Good job, America.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good place to walk away.
So our next movies are is a movie called One Missed Call. So basically the premise for this one is that you get a phone call, and in the Japanese one anyway, it's from yourself. And then they leave a voicemail, and it's basically, the voicemail is your death, and then it's dated like 2 or 3 days in advance, and then when that person dies, it rings someone in their phone book, and it kind of spreads that way. And a similar kind of vein to Pulse, in that there's again a group of young people and technology and like bad stuff spreading through technology. But what were your thoughts on this?
So this was the very first one I watched. One Missed Call. The Japanese one anyway was the very first one I watched. And so the movie opened, and there's that scene which I think is the very first scene where they're like in the sort of cafe restaurant, and they're talking about like, I think they're talking about death, and then they talk about like they mention like a sort of pale like hand being on someone's shoulders, and then you see like a hand on someone's shoulders, and then it's just like their friend arriving. So the movie opened, and I was like, oh, really like I'm really feeling this. Like, like this is like a really like cool way to open a horror film. It's again like the dialogue is on point, and the fact that they're talking about death, and it's like sort of setting a sort of morbid tone. There's already like a sort of creepy moment right out the gate. I was like, yeah, this is like a really really cool way to like establish like the characters and the setting. Um, and then like it just didn't like I think it quite quickly sort of like fell away. I thought like it really didn't live up to like that like first scene. Like I didn't really know anything about it going in. I mean, I literally knew that it was called One Missed Call, and that was it. So I went in as blind as you could really. And I thought the idea was cool. Like you get a phone call from like, and that was one thing that the movie obviously did a good job of really subtly telling me the date, and then having like, because I noticed before them, because I think they might actually say in the film, I think they say in like dialogue, oh, that calls from like a few days from now. But I actually like clocked that beforehand, and I'm not saying that in like, oh, look how clever I am, but I'm saying it in like, I feel like I think the movie did a really good job of making me work that out, or making me like realize that. I think like they did a good job without it. Again, I didn't know that they were going to receive a call from the future. I didn't know that the date was going to be important in any way. I just kind of saw it. It was like still fresh enough in my mind that when like the missed call happens, I was able to go, oh, that's like a few days from now, I'm sure. So that was like a quite cool moment. And again, yeah, as like a concept, I was like, that's a really cool idea. You have kind of mentioned, yeah, it's weird how like these movies old. I think because again, reading up on like reviews and discussions and kind of dissections of these films, it does seem to be like the origin of like, or like people seem to trace the origin of like these concepts basically to The Ring, with the fact that yeah, it's that whole like fear of technology, and they all kind of use it in different ways, don't they? With like Pulse it being like the internet, and then obviously like One Missed Call, it's phone calls, and like cell phones, I guess, mobile phones. But yeah, like so there is this weird like element of familiarity with them, which I guess maybe makes them a bit less scary, because like you're just kind of like, even though you're seeing something fresh, you're like, I've seen this sort of thing before. I know about this sort of thing. But yeah, I just didn't think that like, I thought like once it actually gets to like, the first scene of like the woman walking, and then like she obviously has that moment where she repeats what she said on the voicemail, and then she's like kind of pushed in front of the train. Again, I thought that like the effects in the movie, they weren't like awful, but they just kind of pulled me out of it a little bit, and it wasn't down to them being bad, but it just kind of like the scenes where like an arm is like contorted due to like an invisible force, or like an invisible sort of hand grabs like a leg and like pulls someone. And there's something about that that's just not as scary, I think, when it's like, don't know what it is to me personally anyway, like subjectively, I was just like, I didn't find that creepy. I guess like, I think you're better off either going completely invisible sometimes, where you literally can't see the thing, or like coming up with like a compelling creature design, like obviously like the Grudge does. But yeah, I didn't really find like the presence that scary. I felt like the movie kind of moved at like a bit of a weird pace, where like I never really felt the tension of them building to the moment of death. I think like the weirdest one is like the second death, when it's like the guy, and you like sort of like meet him and they're talking on like the stairway, and then he like immediately tells them, yeah, by the way, I got this like message days ago, and it's like it's
Yeah.
due in like a couple minutes from now, and it's just like, whoa, that was quick. There's like no time to really like get unsettled
That's
about
true.
that. So yeah, it's things like that were a bit weird. That I didn't like. Yeah, I didn't like. Wasn't super into. But I will say, like in the movie's favor, there were some other things that I thought were pretty cool. One thing I thought was really cool was the cat. I don't really. I'd like to. I probably should have done some more like analysis reading on this one, because like again, it was another one where I was like, there was a very deliberate filmic style. I noticed the camera was in motion a lot. Like there was very few like sort of static shots. And then when there were static shots, there was like a good few times when the movie would just like have very quick sort of cuts into like other sort of imagery, and it like did a really good, like it felt like the editing was really on point. It felt like the camera work was really on point, and it felt like they were. This is on me for not really like getting it, but I do feel like it was trying to communicate something with that. So like I would be interested in kind of like reading a bit more into it, because I definitely do feel like they were trying to like relay something with that, and I just haven't got it. It just hasn't clicked in my head. But yeah, like I thought that was like a really interesting sort of angle aspect to it. Like that was it was weird, where I was like almost as absorbed or maybe more absorbed in like the filming style than I was like the story for chunks of it. But actually, like to go back to the story, one thing that I thought was really cool was really liked the sort of backstory of the main character, where she's like scared of like peepholes, and they pay that off with like her having seen like looking through like the sort of paper sort of wall, and like the cigarette hole that's burned into it, and seeing like her dad there's like hung himself. I thought that was like a really clever sort of payoff to that idea. And again, the movie does a really good job of like early on setting that up and like literally telling you, oh, by the way, like these things are usually caused from trauma. And I remember thinking like, well, that's a bit like heavy-handed. And I kind of thought they were gonna like repeatedly go back to the idea of her being scared of peepholes. It was almost like not mentioned until you get the payoff, and then the payoff, even though it's like you make the connection, but the movie doesn't. I don't think the movie goes, oh, that's why she's scared of peepholes, by the way. It almost like it's really, really like overt in the opening, because then it's like, okay, I'm going to make a point of view, basically going to make like a really big deal out of this so that you remember it, so that it sticks in your brain, so that we then don't have to explain the payoff, which I thought was like actually quite a good way of doing it. Again, it makes you feel clever, because you're like, oh, I've figured that out, rather than like the movie literally spelling it out as obviously as possible. So yeah, things like that I thought were pretty cool. And again, another thing that I thought was good was like the payoff overall. With like the whole asthma thing, there was like a nice sort of the mystery was like kind of interesting and intriguing enough. The fact that it has like the creepy tune, and there's a payoff to that, and the asthma sound, and the sort of like reveal and then like twist on the reveal was again, like you've seen it in like that sort of thing in other horror movies, but it was done like I thought really good effect in this one. And it is one of those sort of like unsettling and chilling revelations. But yeah, like I think overall, as you sort of mentioned with like Pulse, I just was I was actually quite bored for a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
I just wasn't really grabbed, and I kind of wanted to be more into it than I was. So yeah, hand over to you.
Wow, Sam, who'd have thunk it would have been Japanese horror to separate us like this? But I really
Oh no.
Yeah, I really like this was easily my favorite Japanese film. I thought it was so good.
Wow.
Like I had such a good time watching it.
That is fantastic.
I just thought it was so like I thought I loved the whole the twist and stuff. I just honestly had such a great time watching it. Like you were saying, there was enough of little clues for you to like. Do you know that way when you sometimes just get embarrassingly into a movie and you're like, oh, I figured it out.
Yeah.
After you've been told like 90% of what the thing is, you figure out the last 10% and you're like, wow, I can't believe that. But no, I thought that's so funny that you said that. But no, I honestly thought it was so good. The whole time I was watching it, I was loving it. It's like, I thought, like you were saying with the camera, there was a couple of bits, like I remember the first phone call, it's kind of like, it does that kind of like horror thing where it's shot, where normally it would be shot from where the kind of antagonist is. So like a shot from the bushes or something. Yeah. But in this one, there's not, like you're not led to believe that the ghost or whatever is hiding in the toilet when they're there. Which in hindsight was a bit weird, but it was a weird choice. But no, Sam, I loved it. I'm not even gonna lie to you.
that is absolutely terrific. I love the fact. I love that you do. Oh, I was too harsh on you, one missed call.
I know.
That's
I got you
brilliant.
back for. No, you got me back. Sorry for me slagging off Pulse, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah, true. I know we're both ripping into the movies the other one likes.
I think though,
Yeah, fair.
for against the movie, there was a lot like of things to kind of piece together. So there was the whole phone call mystery. Who's making the phone calls? There was the mystery with the sweetie, and then there was mystery with the asthma sound.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on, but they did all tie it together. In fairness. And that was one of those points where she had when
Yeah.
she pulled the sweetie out of her bag and she was like, "Oh, she always gave me sweeties." I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like a nice, as you say, like very much in the, like the movie's strength is the payoff is good. Like it does tie things together really
Mm-hmm.
well. And like it makes it seem really effortless when it like all kind of comes
Mm-hmm.
together. And that's the thing. Like I think I did really dig that like aspect of it. And it was nice to kind of feel like there was like it was like
Mm-hmm.
rewarding in the end. But yeah, I think for me the like actual build up, which is it was I think it's just was weird. And I don't know. I almost like can't explain it because like I as I said like I really really dug
Yeah,
that first scene, um, and it
that
was
was really
almost like the
scary.
rest of the movie just didn't like quite live up to it for me, or maybe I just got the wrong impression and just my brain went to like a different place from like whatever I thought the movie was gonna go. Did you like how much about the movie did you know before you kind of
I
went into
only
it?
knew that like I'd read a tiny little synopsis and it was basically like, oh, such and such's pal gets a phone call that predicts her death kind of thing. That was it.
Hmm.
But
So like again, pretty damn blind basically.
yeah, pretty much. I think it's funny as well. Obviously, not to get too much into it just now, but it does that thing that the Ring does, where there's kind of like it's like they have what appears to be a resolution, and oh, we figured it out, and
Yeah.
we've sussed it, and then 10 minutes later, it's oh no, actually, here's the real thing, which I think because I watched all of these in order that we're discussing them, so I think had I rewatched The Ring first, it would maybe have been a bit more obvious. But because it's been so long since I've seen The Ring, and going in blind in this, it didn't um like I didn't quite like connect it to think, oh, maybe that's there's still half an hour of the movie left. That can't be that can't be the ending kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point. I'd like I think similar to you, like when that was all kind of happening, I think there was like a part of me that was like, you've seen this trick pulled before, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I straight up went because I watched this like I said I watched it was the first one I watched, um, yeah I didn't straight up draw the connection to like the Ring, um, and but I think yeah when you stack them up against each other and you start well as we were doing just now start talking about them, so when you do really see that okay yeah like they really did copy that idea, but I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day like it's a really good idea to copy, and I think it does it in its own way well enough that I don't think it, like like I mean there are no original ideas really. I
Yeah.
don't think it like yeah I think copying like the sort of not even like the actual reveal, but copying like the idea of it I
Mm-hmm.
think is quite cool. And so yeah for the movie to make it work in its own way again like I appreciate. I think just like I just like, and this is the thing with like I guess I was actually quite looking forward to watching the American remake of this one as well because I was like, well, and I was like I was tentatively looking forward to it because I was like I don't know if they're going to just straight up remake it or if they're going to
Mm-hmm.
do their own thing with like the concept because I felt like with this one, as I sort of mentioned, I was like the concept of like you getting a phone call and it basically like giving you a clue about your death. I was like that is a really cool concept and I would like to see that. I'd like to see that in a different film. I'd like to see that play out
Mm-hmm.
differently, and to see where else you could take that and what else you could do with it. Because I really do feel like the movie didn't do that much with that idea, and it was kind of like it didn't even really like have that much like there wasn't consistency to it. Like the first time, it's like the phone call that she receives. Well, she's on the phone when she says what she says, and then she dies. So you're like, okay, that makes sense. The
Mm-hmm.
second time, the guy's not on the phone; he just says it to someone out loud, and
Yeah.
then but somehow he receives like a phone call of it. And then the third time, it's like that she receives a picture which also moves, um,
Yeah.
which is just like So like that was a bit weird. Although I do like the fact that they go down the route of where she's just like, well, I'm just gonna cancel the call, cancel the phone, get rid of the phone, and the idea of like it being something that sort of follows you despite that, like when she gets handed someone else's phone and that starts ringing, I was like, that's again like a really good way of like, yeah, of like completely showing how like much the horror is attached to her and how like yeah, there's no escaping it, and it does do a good job of like you. I was watching it and I was like, well, she's got no chance.
Yeah.
There's no way she's like escaping this thing.
Yeah, that's
But
funny.
yeah,
It's like almost like preemptively stopping people from like, you know, when you watch horror movies and you're like, just leave. I would just leave the haunted house. So they're like preemptively being like, but you can't because it'll follow you.
yes, exactly, and I like that. I like when horror movies like do the like tackle the kind of rational thing and show you why it wouldn't work. Because it's one of those things where it's like yeah, you usually watch a horror movie and you're just like, well, why don't you just do that? And it's
Yeah.
quite nice when like you're like, okay, well, you actually can't.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No. So in moving on, the remake, which
remake.
yeah, it came out what 5 years after. So yeah,
It's
what are your
2008,
thoughts?
wasn't it?
Yeah.
So like apart from the Grudge that you watched, it's the most contemporary, or the ones I watched is the most contemporary film. Which is quite funny because it looked awful.
Yeah. At least we're agreeing on this one.
Yeah, no, this like so I mentioned with Pulse, where I said you know I didn't think it was the worst of the American remakes. This is the worst of the American remakes.
Yeah.
This was pretty shocking. Yeah, it was just I'd like again it unfortunately copied like beat by beat the exact same story. At least it did like shave some of the runtime down because I think the original like Japanese version is like just under 2 hours and this one was like an
Yeah.
hour and a half. So like I at least appreciated the fact that it was brief, but yeah, this it's just yeah,
Yeah.
just a mess. And I actually watching it watching it, I kind of wished I'd watched it first because I was like, well, I probably would have appreciated the Japanese version a hell of a lot more
Yeah.
had I seen this one first.
Fair.
Because this, yeah, it really was just like so naff. The whole like it obviously like really plays up this idea. I think it introduces this idea of like you start to hallucinate and see these things
Oh
when like the
yeah.
curse is upon you, and it's always like it's like CGI bugs and then CGI like people with creepy faces, and it just I think one of the things that really bugged me about that was, and this I do appreciate that this is probably again as you kind of mentioned already in this podcast, this is a sort of consequence of us doing it now and with the horror landscape being what it is now, and I think like I mean really like you look at something like Hereditary in particular, which really changed the game, but just horror in general was a lot more. I think even Insidious to a degree was like a lot more subtle. Like there's a lot more like subtlety in horror
Yeah.
now in terms of like you won't just the scary thing isn't always just like in front of you. The movie isn't always like shoving your face in the scary thing. There's a lot of like really creepy like detail in the background and stuff like that. And I think this movie had the opportunity to do that, where like you know there are these things that characters are imagining, but every single time there's like anything creepy, the movie like has to have it like full focus right in the center
Yeah.
of the camera so that you can't miss it. And it just with it being so reliant on like special effects, it just looks laughable. It just looks really bad.
100%.
And yeah, it just like overwhelmingly the movie just looked like it just looked poorly. Like, yeah, I mean like obviously there is like a sort of gloss to it because it's a big American production, but despite that, everything else about it felt really cheap, felt really off. The writing felt really weak. The direction didn't feel like particularly strong. The
Yep.
acting, again, was just like what you'd expect from like that era horror movie. And there were even like actors in it that I recognized, but just they felt like caricatures more than characters.
Yeah.
Like as much as they kind of could be. The movie like telegraphs everything like really really strongly, and yeah, it just like yeah, I just didn't have such a good time with it.
Yeah.
Um,
No, 100% agree. I think as well when you were talking about like the scary things needing to be like front and center, I think especially like I mean I'm always talking about it, but The Haunting of Hill House, it's the TV show, but
Yeah.
it does such a good job of building like this horrible like feel it like this horrible tension, like you're scared the whole time, but nothing's scary, and it's because everything's in the background, and you just kind of
Yeah.
can tell that something's there, but it's not right in your face, and that's so much scarier. But this movie obviously was like, nah, we'll just make scary faces. And I think the how it tied in, like at the end, was so poorly done. Like, oh look,
Yeah.
here's a close up of a jar of millipedes, and right beside it, it's a creepy like woman with a buggy toy. It was
Which why does that exist? And why would you ever buy a child that?
yeah. Why would that? Everything else in the room was pretty modern. Like what?
Yeah.
It seemed like
Like
it was funny.
yeah,
Like it was the
exactly.
kind
Like
of thing. If we had done it at uni, the lecturer would have been like, "What is this? Take this out." Do you know what I mean?
that's a very, very good point actually. Yeah, we would have like would never would have got past like
No.
never would have got that into the film. Never would have got away with that.
This movie is the one I wanted to talk about a certain part of, and it cannot be ignored because it was hysterical. And it was the very opening shot where she's in like this whole Japanese garden, and it's
Oh
just like
yeah.
embarrassing because it's I don't think she's in Japan. It's never mentioned that she's
No.
in Japan or that she likes Japan. It's just they were like, oh, one Miss Call's Japanese. Let's make this one look Japanese, but only for the opening scene because that would be too much effort after that. And I just thought it was like laughable.
I completely forgot about the opening scene. I think that was actually one of the that that scene was actually one of like the few that I was like, okay, didn't love it, but like I was surprised that they killed off that character, but I think because I didn't know that they were fully going the route of we are going to like completely remake the movie. Um, but yeah, like that. As soon as like once we were out of that scene, I think the next scene is like a bunch of like high schoolers. Are they in high school?
I think she's
Talking
meant
about
to be
like
in
is it
high school,
college, high
but she
school?
looks like a middle-aged woman,
Yes.
the main character.
Yeah, properly. Um, but yeah, they're then talking about like obviously that girl who's like goes to their school, and yeah, that was when I was suddenly like, hang on, so she's just like a school kid. Like A, she didn't really look like it, and B, like why does she live in like a place like that? Like
Yeah.
that's so weird. So yeah, like no, I'm glad that you brought that up because I had completely forgotten about it. But yeah, that was a really weird choice. Like
Yeah.
of all the ways to like, I guess it kind of like it is like the most overt and obvious and weird like way to kind of like nod to the original. So it makes sense that it would be in this remake because
Yeah.
that's all
I
that
think
movie
it,
is.
it definitely set the tone for the movie. And yeah.
Yeah,
And it didn't go up
absolutely.
from there. It just continued on its terrible plateau.
No. Yeah. And again, it's a shame because like I feel like the core concept of like one missed call is like so is interesting. You can do so much with that. You can like you can really take that places and you can like put your own spin on it. And I think with this one in particular, it would have been really cool if they had actually gone like, okay, we're gonna go our own direction with it, and we're gonna take like the idea that like we're gonna use the same springboards and we're gonna land in a different place basically. But yeah, it just instead they're like, well, we've got this blueprint that we're gonna use,
Yeah.
so we're just gonna follow that.
Yep. So moving swiftly on, this is our last choice, and I think you could argue probably the most famous Japanese horror, and for like Western audiences anyway, and that is of course The Ring.
Yeah.
Or a Ringu, I think it's called in Japanese. Um,
Yeah.
So yes, Sam, what was your thoughts on the Japanese version?
So this is a weird one. I've seen like out of all of them, like I mentioned, I'd seen the Grudge once before. Hadn't seen any of the others. I'd seen the Ring about the same time as I saw the Grudge, which automatically kind of like links the two in my head. But there are links aside from that anyway. But I've seen at least twice. I've seen the remake up until rewatching it for this podcast. I'd seen the American remake at least twice. So I felt that going into this one, I felt like I had the strongest idea of like what was going to happen, where things were going to go, like, and I was kind of again, it's one of those things that like I was kind of hoping, part of me was like, I really hope that this is actually really different from the American version, because it would have been cool to see. But it's not really. It is like effectively the same sort of story. I tried to kind of like, because obviously I think I watched, say obviously, I watched Ringu last out of all the Japanese horrors. And obviously I'd noticed like well, I had observations at least with like the way that the others were filmed. So I kind of wanted to get that from this one. And there was nothing at all really kind of stood out to me. And again, I was looking at kind of like deep dives on it, or analysis and stuff on it afterwards, and I saw like a channel that was like praising the fact that they use loads of like natural lighting. And I was like, okay, like yeah, I guess it makes it like look realistic, but like also it just didn't, yeah, that just doesn't stand out to me. And I guess that just comes down to personal preference, where like I do like there to be a sort of like artistry behind like the camera. But like yeah, the movie just is quite like almost like uniform and quite like basic in the way that it's shot, with the exception obviously of the actual Ring tape. Which yeah, like I think out of the, not to like sort of jump the gun and get into like my thoughts on the American version too quickly, but I think out of the two, I think I prefer the Japanese version of like the tape.
Okay.
And the stuff that you see. I think it's I really like, I mean, given that this is obviously the original version of it, I think it's a really compelling, really like just something that's so like unsettling, just something like so like intrinsically creepy about like the tape. And it's not just, that's actually one thing that I'll talk about. I don't really have anything to talk about in terms of like the camera work, but out of all the films, The Ring definitely uses like its sound better than any of the others, I think. The Grudge obviously like is a close contender, but I think the score, like the music that sort of plays when like the Ring tape is like playing, is like really like, again, just like it kind of gets under your skin. I like love the fact that obviously like it's this whole thing that you watch, and then there's the phone that rings. And like the movie does manage to like properly kind of like, it makes a phone ringing scary. Which is just like one of those things on paper you're like, that's bonkers that they can do that, but they did such a good job of it. Yeah, there's just like the sound design's really good. Camera work was like fine. The story itself, again, it's really hard for me to. That's the thing. It didn't feel like a fresh experience for me, because I've seen the American one and I know it like well enough. But I do have to give it credit for the fact that like, it is such an interesting idea, and it actually like, unlike unlike One Missed Call, and like, even like yeah, like I think but I think it really like takes the idea of the tape, and it does such a cool job of like really like running that like concept through, and like really uses it as the sort of like spine of the movie, like a sort of like as the sort of movie basically is the tape, and like its origins. And yeah, like I think it does such a good job of, I think what the Japanese version does really well is it doesn't actually explain all that much. It leaves a lot of like questions sort of unanswered, and it really like preserves the sort of mystery of the tape, and like what it all really means, and how it sort of came to be. It really doesn't like spoon feed you that much. One thing like that I noticed with like the very end of the film, is like the protagonist and her son are like sort of driving away, and they're off to like, basically like they've just made a copy of the tape, and they realize that they can like basically survive if they pass on the copy, if they make someone else watch it, because like that's how she survived, and she wants to save her son. And they're sort of driving down the highway, and there's like storm clouds ahead. It really reminded me of like the ending of the first Terminator. And I, again, like looking up on it afterwards, like weirdly enough, The Ring is based on a book apparently.
I saw that in
the
titles, I'm sure.
I can't really get my head around that, because like it seems like such a visual idea that
Yeah.
like seems so weird to think that anyone would ever write a book of it and not just make a movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in the book, it makes a bigger point of the fact that, so like the girl, she's called Samara in the American one. What do you remember what she's called?
It does begin with an S again. It's like so.
It does begin with an S.
I can't remember what it is. I've only just
I
finished
was
watching
I
it as
was gonna
well.
say Saga or something like that, but yeah, I
Yeah.
can't remember what her name is in the Japanese version. But apparently, like in the book, there's a whole thing of like she hates society like itself. Like she just wants society to sort of crumble, and that's why like that's the reason for like the tape needing to be passed on, and the whole like storm cloud thing at the end is actually like I think I don't know if it's a deliberate nod to Terminator, but it is this literally the same meaning where it's like, okay, well, this is basically the apocalypse that they're kickstarting,
That's
because
funny.
like they'll pass it on to someone else, he'll pass it on to someone else, and it's gonna just basically run right through society like a wave, and it's gonna just kind of bring everything to its knees. So like as far I guess like to go back to like my love for Pulse and the fact that it has this sort of like huge scope. Yeah, like I've got to give The Ring props for that as well because it really
Hmm.
does like the movie like does it literally like ends the world on a different place than it opens on. But yeah, like I think again it's really hard for me to talk about without talking about the American one.
Yep.
But I just think yeah, it does so much well from like the opening even, where it's obviously like two girls and they have like the sort of fake. They have like two fake outs, where she's
Yeah.
like talking about having seen the. They mention the tape. She mentions she's haven't seen it, and then she pretends to like be affected by it, and then she's like just joking, and then the phone rings, and you're like, oh my god, and then it's the mum. Um, yeah, so I, like that whole like it's such a like more than like most concepts in a movie. It makes sense to have like because so many horror movies do that, don't they? Where they introduce like the monster or the
Uh-huh.
idea, and they just have like disposable characters to like introduce that you know are gonna die. But I think The Ring probably does that better than like probably every other
Yeah.
horror that I've seen. I think The Ring does like the disposable introduction so well. Um, One thing I didn't dig was the negative light effect on like the person's face as like they're
Oh
attacked by
yeah.
like the girl whose name I can't remember. I feel like that just yeah, it just kind of looks a bit naff.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think I mean the movie's like pretty lean. It's only like an hour and a half. And it crams a lot in there. There's a really good mystery. Some obviously some fantastic like imagery just like with the tape and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And it does kind of like manage to like introduce all these like disparate elements and connect them like quite satisfyingly, while also like retaining like the mystery. Another thing I didn't love about it was there's like psychic exposition that kind of happens at one point,
Yeah.
which was just a bit like it's almost like they were just like, well, we can't think of a natural way to explain this, so she just there you go, there's the information. um,
Yeah. It was
so
weird as well.
yeah,
Yeah, it was very weird because it was the kind of dad character. He was the one that was apparently a little bit psychic, but it was the mum character who like had this whole weird out of body experience when she was the one that was there, like kind of in the scene, which was yeah, it
yeah,
felt very
yeah,
much like how are we going to explain this? And obviously she's the one
exactly.
that needs to know
Um,
because she's the one that needs to save her son. But yeah, I think it's difficult to
yes,
talk about this without talking about the American one. Um, but no, I think this suffered from the same thing as the Grudge, where the anticipation was so much more like people always said, "Oh yeah, the Japanese one's meant to be so much scarier,"
yeah,
and then you watch it, and obviously you've got these like super high expectations, and I'm a really big fan of the American one. Um, and I wouldn't say I was disappointed. I think it's different enough that you could watch the two of them separately. Um,
mm,
and it was good. I think there was some really scary bits. I think the bit when she comes out of the TV was really scary. Um,
yes, definitely.
like it looked a lot more like real than the American one, and I know it's like super spoofed now,
Yeah,
but I think the whole that was like super scary. Even just like it's got that thing that the Grudge as well, where it's always scarier when ghosts move like that slow kind of creepy way somehow because
yeah,
yeah. But a lot of the times now, like if there's ghosts, they do that like insidious slash conjuring thing where they like are here and then suddenly they're over here, and like there's no escape. Whereas these movies kind of make it feel like you can't escape because you're so terrified, like you can't even run away,
yeah,
which I think is interesting. It's a bit more. I think the kind of quick moving ghost is a bit more cheap, like, whereas I think this is maybe a
I
bit,
agree.
yeah. But yeah, without any further ado, what are your thoughts on the remake? Are you a fan?
So yeah, like just to get straight into it, yeah, like I really dig the remake. I genuinely didn't know, because again it was the very last thing that I watched was the American remake, and it was the one that I'd seen a couple of times before when I was younger and was less versed in horror. And again, having had the experience I had on all the other horror films, I genuinely didn't know if I was going to like it. You know, I was like, am I gonna find this a bit naff? Am I not really gonna like love it? Like, what are my thoughts gonna be on it? And yeah, like I was actually kind of almost like caught off guard by how much I really kind of got into it, and there were like parts where I was like, the movie like actually had me like quite sort of like creeped out, and I think a few points where I kind of jumped, and I was like, that's honestly like testament to the movie for that, because I've seen it twice and just watched the remake, the
Yeah.
original version of it, and it's still able to do that. Yeah, like I think, and again I looked at and kind of read like comparisons and discussions on like the differences and like changes and like what are good and what are bad, and it's one that it seems to be really subjective, and it is really hard for me to like objectively look at them and go, okay, well, this one's better, that one's better, these things are done better, and like these are why. Because yeah, again, ultimately, like The Ring scared me when I was younger, and was like one of the big horror movies that like I think of when I think of like being young and seeing a horror movie and being scared but loving it. In fact, and this is just like I remember watching. I think the first time I ever watched The Ring was with my best friend, and I remember we were like, I think we might have been. I think we genuinely might have been alone in the house. I think my parents may have been out, or they were in bed, but I think they must have been out. And I remember, so this like obviously mobile phones. Everyone has a mobile phone now, and at the age that we watched it, like people did have like mobile phones, but they just weren't like the mobile phones weren't what they are now, where like they're like smartphones and you're on them all
Yeah.
the time, in the sense that like you just like you're, because you can do so much with them, you're connected so much, and everyone uses them as like the main way of talking. It was kind of just like people had like flip phones, and you had like only so many minutes and so many texts.
Yeah.
So like they were kind of just like you would occasionally use them and you had it, but it wasn't really like a big facet of your life. And I remember finishing watching this movie, and my best friend, Joanne, she rang our house phone, and I've
Oh.
never let her ever gone paler. Because I
That's
obviously
amazing.
just like it didn't even occur to me that she had her mobile phone and that
Uh-huh.
she would be able to do that. But it was just like the timing of it genuinely like unnerved me so much.
That's amazing.
And again, it's one of those things that I just like always like because I have that like memory and that connection to the movie, it makes me love it all the more.
Yeah.
But yeah, the American remake I think is the only one of them. Weirdly enough, I was thinking about this just literally just before the podcast started. It's the only one where like the American version is longer. All the rest of them,
Ooh.
the remakes are either like I think they're either like the same length or like noticeably shorter. I think that's right. Anyway, I think the American Ring is the only one where like because the original Ring is like an hour and a half, and then the remake is like 2 hours long. So it actually like embellishes the story and the sort of lore. And I actually like you could there's arguments to be made against them doing that, like it sort of like spoon feeds everything, and not don't really spoon feed everything, but it does kind of like lay everything out, fully explain everything, but at the same time like I think like it does such a good job of it, like you are hooked, like
Yeah.
explaining all the different like aspects of the video. Yeah, okay, it kind of makes it less creepy, but at the same time like it's I thought it's interesting, like I love the way that like as the story's progressing, it's just showing you these things, and then it's like, oh, that was from the video, and that's what it means, and that's the connection to it all. So yeah, I thought it handled the mystery really well. I thought it handled like the explanation behind everything really well. The writing was actually really sharp in a lot of places, which I like wasn't expecting. It even has like I thought every character, whether you like them or don't is like a personal thing, but like I thought there was like all the characters were all really
Uh-huh.
memorable in their own way. Down to when she goes to like the cabin, which obviously like the whole thing's effectively starts, where she finds the tape. The guy that's like working there is like doing the whole magic card trick thing. And I was like, they didn't need to do that. They could have literally just had like in the Japanese version where it's just like a quick like exchange and they get the information and move on to the next scene because they get the tape. But I was like, I appreciate that the movie is like, it really felt like they were trying. It felt like there was a love of the original and they were really trying to like actually like build on it.
Yep.
Obviously there's like people complain about things like, especially nowadays, they're like, oh, they just slap like this filter over it and it kind of like cheapens the whole look of the thing. I actually like, again, I also have like, I kind of like the filter. I think it kind of works for this movie. It's not something that I like to see in like most things, but I do think it kind of works for this film. It adds to like the sort of unsettling aura of the film. I even read like an interesting like comment on it, and the fact that it's like there is this whole idea of like the well and the tree and sort of life, and like green being a color of like life and sort of like growing and health and healing, and something that you typically associate as being like a good thing. And the fact that the movie like twists it and makes it kind of sickly,
Yep.
and it does thematically connect to the well, and the fact that like, okay, the place where obviously the tape is discovered, there's like that tree that's like sort of significant, but it's like that tree is basically nurtured by a dead girl's like corpse. And yeah, like,
That's
even
good.
just like one of the bits that I had completely forgotten about, but like really got me was towards the end, when they're talking, obviously like the mystery's like sort of being like solved, and they discuss the fact that like Samara felt, well, she was like bagged and chucked down the well, which is a great sequence. And she talks about the fact, obviously they work out that she was alive when she was down there, which is like horrifying enough. But then like, I think the boyfriend sort of asks her, how long would you survive down there? And she was 7 days. And I was like, that's such a great like
Yeah.
payoff to the whole 7 days motif. It's such a good way to like make something that's so just you makes it like sort of puts a chill down your spine, but in a completely different way. So yeah, like all in all, lot of love for
Yeah.
the American Ring.
No.
Probably the best of the remakes.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'd say The Ring was the best out of all of the movies. Yeah. Because I think it's
Probably
I
agree,
think
to be
it's so
honest.
good. I think like you were saying, it adds things to the movie that it just make it so like so much creepier. Like there's the bits that they've added in the movies are bits that always stick in my mind. Like there's the horrible bit when she pulls that hair out her throat. Like Naomi was, that's so grim, and it's weird, like gory, but it's not like blood and guts gore. It's just like horrible and horrifying.
Yeah.
And then there's other little bits like I really like where she sees like she's watching the tape and there's like a fly going across the screen, and then she can like pluck it off the screen. Stuff like that is
Oh
so
my god!
creepy.
Just sorry to interrupt you,
Sorry.
but when I was watching this film, the last like 20 minutes of the movie, there was a fly in my room.
No way.
I was just like, couldn't. Yeah, no. Honestly, I was like, this is like. On top of obviously like the thing I was talking about with the phone call, I was just like, every time I watch
You're
this
like
movie, like
sweating,
part of
like,
it just like pervades into my life. Yeah.
That's fine. I can
Yeah,
imagine
sorry,
you just
as you
sitting
were.
looking at your phone like, oh god, please.
Yeah. No, I was deeply uncomfortable.
That's amazing. But no, there's that, and then I think the whole because I was just watching the end of it just before the podcast, and they were on the ferry, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're gonna do the bit with the horse. But then, because I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, in the remake, there's like is it like the eye of a horse or something in the tape? I think it's in the
Yeah.
Japanese one, but it's not really alluded to. So that's like a nice bit in the remake where they kind of make a big deal out of that, and then there's that horrible scene again where the horse like escapes from its box or
Yeah.
whatever it is it's in, and like essentially like commits suicide, and it's such like a creepy bit because normally you watch horror movies and it's like the dogs can sense when someone's a bad guy, but this is like a horse that's just gone
Yeah.
absolutely berserk and like actively killed itself to avoid getting anywhere near kind of like the island in Samara and stuff like that. I think as well it does a good nice, like you were saying, it's a bit more like it develops kind of her story a bit more, kind of because there's the whole bit where she goes to
Yeah.
see what is essentially her bedroom, and then that's when it comes up when there's like the big kind of tree thing on the
Yeah.
wall, and that ties that in as well, which is nice. And like you were saying about the kind of bluey green thing, I think it's funny because people always moan about it, but I think this is the movie that kind of started it, and in other worse movies copied it, and then it's just become like a cliche. Whereas in The Ring it isn't. It's like actually like a kind of like a narrative element as well. But yeah, I do. All in all, great movie. I think Naomi Watts is amazing in it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Like she's that was one thing I really noticed was like the acting in the movie was like really on point. Again, especially like in comparison to like other horrors that we watched. But yeah, she in particular is like really sort of captivating, really compelling.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd like again that this was where I guess I was talking about like your like love of characters is sort of subjective. The kid is just like
he's so
I
weird
appreciate
in the remake.
He's so weird and creepy, isn't he?
Yeah.
To the point that like they are to a degree. It feels like they are going for that to a degree, but I think you are also supposed to care about him maybe a bit more than like I kind of did. 'Cause like the bit where it's like he watches the tape and I was kind of like, well, fine. Not that much of a loss, to be honest.
I think the weird thing about the remake as well, and I remember everyone kind of talking about it whenever you talk about The Ring, is that for some reason there's like a weird confusion, like, is that her son?
Yeah, because I completely got this when like I was watching it, and again I've seen it twice and watched the original version, and I was watching it and like for the first part of the movie they really make it seem like he's not like she's like his guardian, and it's just weird because obviously he calls her Rachel and was his name Caden. She calls him like Caden. I mean, well, she's not gonna call him son. But it's just like there is just like because she obviously like it feels like she's quite distant. Feels like I think it's like the whole scene as well of like her turning up to like the school and she's on the phone and she's like swearing down the phone and then she's suddenly in the school. It's almost like it makes it seem as if she's only just taking care of this child. She's not like had to build her whole life around it. There's just this really weird thing where it really feels like this kid is new in her life and she's like kind of new in the kid's life, and there's sort of like and then it just kind of turns out that like no, she is the kid's mum, and that was a really weird element. Even like the whole like, cause it even does a kind of similar thing with like the dad, which I can't remember his name, where like he like the first time he and the kid meet in the context of the film, it's like raining and the kid's like walking down the street in the rain and he's like walking down the street in the rain and they just like stop and they're facing each other and they just stare at each other for a second, don't say anything, and then they just walk past each other, and I was like, what a weird what are you trying to tell us right now? What a weird way to like have those characters meet and establish their like relationship and dynamic. Like again, I have like so much love for this movie, but that is one aspect of it that I don't really get what they were going for with it, because it just doesn't really land in any sort of like meaningful or satisfying way.
But no, I think other than that, it's just I think it's so good. I think it's like I think it's like peak kind of noughties horror movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it probably had as big an impact here as Ringu had in Japan. Which is like again, so like basically like I think it delivered as much as like an American remake can, and I guess it's why you got so many American remakes of Japanese horror films, because like The Ring did such a good job, did it so well. What year did The Ring come out? Do you know?
I don't. I was meant to write it down, but I forgot. I don't know. I'd say 2001 maybe.
Was it? That's what I was thinking. Because so it's like the director Gore Verbinski. He went from doing that to Pirates of the Caribbean. Which is just like it's just even more fantastic. What a range! Yeah. To go from like
because Pirates of the Caribbean is also a good movie.
It is fantastic. Such a good film. Granted, I suppose there is like a sort of horror-esque element, especially with the first one. So you can sort of see the carryover there. But yeah, like not at all what you would think of. Like you would not think watching The Ring, oh yeah, this guy's gonna do Pirates of the Caribbean like either next or like really really soon.
How bizarre.
Yeah, it just makes me appreciate it all the more because like stylistically they're so different, narratively they're so different. But yeah, again like going back to there's just to talk about like the movie. The American one does such a good job of like pretty much every single thing that is like mentioned has like some sort of payoff or connection. Like it, and again, there are people who would argue that that's like a detraction, is that the movie has to explain everything. But I just like, and sometimes it like does go to an absurd place. Like the one I think that was a bit of a stretch for me was the fact that like the room that she goes to in the cabin, the sort of like hotel or hostel or B&B or whatever it is, the cabin that she like the room that she goes to watch the tape is room 12, which the only reason she goes to that room is because like her like is it cousin, like
I think it's
niece,
the boy's
whatever,
cousin, so it
who
must
was
be her
there.
niece.
That's it. Yeah, the niece. So the niece and her friends were in that room and they watched the tape in there. So that's the only reason she picks that room. Yeah, that room ends up being the room that is built over the well.
Yeah. That in
which is
itself
just like
seems a
that,
bit weird. Like
that,
structurally, would you build over a well?
and I also did make me think like, who did did the family build over the well and then like sell that property? Because is the well on the island?
No, I don't think
it is.
No.
But yeah, that's where she obviously kills her kid. And in the flashback before she kills her kid, the horses are there. so like, do they also own that land? Like, I read that again was just like, and it's one of those things where I'm like, I appreciate that the movie is trying to like tie everything up, but it was like, that was one of the things where I think it went a bit too far and almost just started like making all these holes from its like explanation. But that was pretty much like the only issue with that like whole like all the explanation stuff that it gave. I guess it's worth me saying as well, because I said that I prefer the tape in the Japanese version. The American one, I remember when I first saw it, really really creeped me out, really unsettled me. But I think watching it now, one thing that I was like a bit critical of was like, I liked that in the Japanese version it looks really like sort of like really cheaply filmed and really poorly filmed, really poor film quality. Whereas like in the American one, you have some shots that are like that, but then you have like a swooping zoom in on like the woman just before she jumps off the cliff, and I was like, that looks a bit cinematic for. And that like also
somebody's
like
out there with like a drone
even that shot. Yeah, and that also, I think, because the movie then explains the tape so much, it then also you're left with more questions of like, who filmed this and when, and like, was it Samara that filmed it? Because like there's a point in the movie where obviously Naomi Watts thinks it's she talks to like Brian Cox, and I love that when she's talking to him, she's like trying to get him to watch the tape. She's like, oh, you're not curious what's on it? She's like, you know that he's gonna die if you show it to him. Why are you so keen for him to watch this? It's like, that's a bit brutal. But yeah, she at one point, like, because she's like, I think it's a message from your mum. I was like, there's footage of her jumping off a cliff. How would she have cut that together? Like, how would she have filmed it? Like, surely that's the biggest indicator that that's not her. She's not behind that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that aspect of it as well, I was like, that was a bit odd. But yeah, like, what a film.
So good. I know, I feel like we could just carry on chatting about specifically just The Ring for forever.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, easily.
So, I'll wrap it up there so that doesn't happen. Not that wouldn't be fun, but...
Fair.
So yeah, thank you again for joining me, Sam.
Not at all.
It's been super fun.
Thank you for such a great topic.
Yeah, no worries. And I'm excited to hear what your idea for next time is, which will be podcast number 11. Double digits.
I know, we're now in... I know. Well, you gracefully entered the double digits, so thank you for that.
I know, the pressure was on to think of a good one, honestly.
Well, you delivered.
Yeah, thank you. Right, So I think that's all for us from this time from us for this time. But I'll see you guys again in 2 weeks. So until then, goodbye.
Farewell.
There we go.
Stunning. Oh, that's so loud.